Friends, peace and joy be with you today. So, because we want to be open to the Holy leading us, and because we are a community that has centered creativity in our life together, and because we are living in a time when we need creativity to survive and thrive, and to help others survive and thrive. Today, we continue our series informed by the Artist's Way. The Artist's Way is a 12-week course that's focused on recovering our inner artists and helping discover a spiritual path to higher creativity. And there's a small group that's working through the book every week together, but in worship, we are also working through the concepts that show up in that book. And so this week, we hold the scripture lesson from 2 Corinthians in conversation with the chapter and theme around rediscovering a sense of integrity. In the summer of 2021, I took a 6-week leave of absence from the church that I served. I spent the summer, or those 6 weeks, precious weeks, hanging out with my kids and AJ, visiting my family and friends, and feeling a freedom to do what I wanted to do. And then at the end of August, I went back to work, knowing in my deepest secret heart that I should not go back. But I could not allow myself off of the hook. I couldn't allow myself to admit this. And it wasn't until my kids were in crisis, and really now I can admit that I was in crisis too, but it was when my kids could show me how much they were struggling that it made it very clear that I needed to leave. Because I had been going round and round and round with myself, trying to work up the courage to leave, but I couldn't. I just couldn't let myself do that. Because my false self was making the decisions, not my true self. My false self is the one that can't stand to disappoint anyone, or myself that takes way more responsibility for what others really need to take responsibility for. My false self shows up as one that is too proud and can't admit that I'm in over my head. That's how my false self shows up often. My true self, there were moments where my true self was like trying to exert some more authority in that relationship. So I asked for some help with a coach, to find someone else to help give me permission to leave. My inner nature, my true self, was trying to convince my false self that I was not okay and that I needed to leave. Man, my false self is so good at overfunctioning. Whew, so good. And this week, as we continue with the concepts in the Artist's Way, this recovering a sense of integrity, it's that sense that there are a lot of things that we think and feel that we really need to admit to ourselves. And very often, those feelings deep in ourselves, we feel like we cannot admit out loud because they feel very scary and very unsettling. They push for something to change. And so often, instead of saying, I feel, there's a whole list, right? But I feel detached from myself, I would just say, I feel okay. Or, it'll be okay. Or, I just got to get through this week, right? And with that, in my situation, like just totally glossing over how I really feel and glossing over what that is telling me about what I care about, or how I'm hurting, or where I'm stuck. Because very often our false selves, it's the self that's concerned with how other people perceive us. It's the self that's concerned with how do I get along? How do I use the latest data or technique to solve a big, huge problem that's not solvable with data or techniques? Those false selves that we have, they're practiced and they erect barriers so that we don't feel vulnerable or really seen in those spots where we're hurting. So, if any of you have been spending time with morning pages in the last 4 weeks, you might have bumped into some of these things. And if you aren't, morning pages, we talked about this like 5 weeks ago already when we did the first couple weeks of this. So, the morning pages is this practice of every morning, as soon as you can manage it, to write 3 pages by hand, just stream of conscious thinking. So meanderings, ideas, nothing is too petty or silly or too stupid or weird to be included, because what the morning pages do is help us discover what our true self is telling us. So but it also helps us notice our critic or our censor, the voice inside of us that's saying, oh, we shouldn't say that out loud. Oh, we shouldn't even write that down. That's not a good idea. Nobody wants to know that, right? Those are the kinds of things that come up when we just let ourselves write, where it's not like, oh, I'm going to write a story about whatever, or I'm going to focus on this topic. It's just writing what's coming to you. So as we spend time with these morning pages, we can bump into our true self. That self that brings up our deepest secret heart messages. And then we have to decide what we will do with those deepest secret heart messages. Will we stay with those feelings and give our true self more space? Will we keep working with the tools we have to gain more clarity? Or maybe we'll avoid these uncomfortable, awkward feelings and truths. Will we keep our true selves at a distance or create some space to draw close to that true self? In today's reading in 2 Corinthians, Paul, who is long-winded and says things in kind of very roundabout ways, but Paul reminds us that in the days when the Israelites were first wandering around the wilderness, God called for them to meet in a tent. And this was a God who was so overwhelming, you could not meet or see God's face out in the open. Otherwise, you would die. And when Moses met God on the mountainside, Moses had to hide facing the mountain. And then even then, when he came down, his face glowed so much that they were like, you got to put something over your face because we're going to go blind. That's how it's described in Exodus. So there needs to be a way to meet God, but something that's sort of mediated. Because God is intending to remain with God's people and not be far away. God didn't want to stay on that mountaintop or be in a temple somewhere, but right in the middle of their lives. Because you might recall, God went ahead of them in the day as a flame, and at night was a cloud, right? God was right there. And so, because God is creating space to draw near to God, they set up a tent. So when they stopped and built their camp, they set up a tent. It was a beautiful and detailed tent. It was festooned with fine embroidery and gold, but it was a tent, nonetheless, something that could come down and go with the people. And then they could set it up again. And though the people entered the tent to encounter God, God did not live in the tent. God visited the tent when God chose to do so, and not just because the people were like, oh, this is the time you're supposed to be here. It's 10:30 on Sunday morning. Where are you? Let's go, right? That's not what happens, because God cannot be tamed and certainly cannot be contained in even the fanciest tent. The tent is not for God, it is for us. We cannot meet God without the tents, these very bodies that God made. We cannot meet God without our language, the human language, because this is how we can hear the word and the words of God and share our experiences of God with one another. These human things are necessary to our lives and are created by God for us, but they do not and cannot contain God. These human things break, our bodies break and change and die. All the human things break and change and die, but God does not break or die or change. Even though the works we do in God's name might not last forever, God is forever, and we can trust in that. So as we bring our questions and our feelings and our concerns out in the open, we can choose to take another step toward what our true self and what they're calling us to do. God meets us in that space where we have no idea what's next, and still we are willing to take the next step toward listening to our true selves. When I left my last call, I knew that our family needed less stress and that our family needed me to be less stressed. I was stressed out all the time. And I didn't know anything more than that. And with that knowledge, I took a step in faith. Faith that the community I had felt so much responsibility for would be okay. They would. And faith that I would be okay, and faith that my kids would be okay. Taking those first steps was so very important. And then those steps led to the next steps, and more after that. Steps that have given my true self much more space and time within me. So my false self is making fewer decisions these days, which is a good thing, because it really changes how I show up in the world. And at every step, God walked with me. And I was especially aware of it when I had no idea where those steps would take me. And as I took those steps, I recovered a sense of my own integrity. That those deepest heart secrets were the truths that I could trust, and that they represented the true me. And as I go through the artist's way asking, where am I stuck? Where is my false self trying to cover up what I need to work through? In asking these kinds of questions, I'm able to continue to create space and time to listen more closely to my true self and to further recover that sense of integrity that I can show up as I truly am. And I can let my false self just go sit down, take a back seat, because you don't need to do all that stuff anymore. I can be who I am and not be afraid to show up that way. So this week, I invite you to take some time to sit down and listen to your deepest secret hurt. If you find something there that brings up fear or concern, try to stay with it. Try not to shut it down or push it away or distract yourself with something else. And instead, ask God to meet you there and help you take a step in faith. just one step at a time. Amen.